Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 30 of Chess Basics, Things Every Chess Player Ought to Know. This episode we're going to continue looking at the openings and in particular the Italian game, which we started looking at in the last episode. The Italian game goes e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now bishop to c4. That's a characteristic move of the Italian game, or gioco piano. Putting immediate pressure on f7 and inviting a couple of different responses from black. The main moves are knight f6 and bishop to c5. And what we're looking at in this video, like we did last time in the last episode, is the bishop to c5 move. And after c3, which we looked at last time, that leads to the main line or the Müller attack. What we're looking at this episode is the move b4, and this is known as the Evans Gambit. So the Evans Gambit was named after Captain Evans. Captain Evans was a Welsh sea captain born in 1790, and he actually served the English Navy during the Napoleonic Wars, and then after the Navy he transferred to the Postal Department, where he sailed a postal packet between England and Ireland. And while he was on one of these trips, looking over a book of chess, I guess, between watches, he came up with this idea of sacrificing a pawn here. And he was excited to play it. And when he got back to London, he was a regular at a London chess club. He played it against Alexander MacDonald and won that game, which is pretty striking because MacDonald was one of the well, he was considered the strongest player in England at the time. He represented England in the famous match against the French. The game's MacDonald-Labordonnais. You can look them up if you're interested. So this move has a couple of objects. One is that it distracts the bishop away from the center and gains some time by kicking the bishop like that, and allows white to build up a strong center. So what white gains in giving up the pawn, he gives up the pawn in exchange for quick development, getting his pieces out quickly, and a big center. So whether that's enough compensation or not is still a matter of debate. If you put it in a modern chess engine and ask it to evaluate it, I think it still comes out slightly in black's favor. So maybe he doesn't quite have full compensation, but he has quite a bit of compensation, and this is still very playable. You just don't see it at the top levels these days because at the top level, the masters and the grandmasters are looking for openings that give them a slight edge as white, which this doesn't. It basically leads to an even game with chances for both sides. But it leads to very interesting play, too, so it can be recommended to regular players. So let's go back. That's just the idea of the opening. Let's take a look at it in a little more detail here. So after the move b4, black is not obliged to take, and if you want to decline the gambit, probably the safe and sane way to decline it is to play the move bishop to b6. And now this does allow white to gain some space. So you can play a4 immediately, and you have to play a6 so your bishop doesn't get trapped over here. You don't really want to play the bishop to d4 and have it exchanged for the knight. That would be good for white. So you want to keep this bishop on the strong diagonal as black. And, you can hope to develop your pieces and castle in this line, whereas white will get a lot of space on the queen side. And so there's a slight edge to white, but not a huge one, and no more than the average opening advantage for white. So that's definitely a playable way for black if you don't feel like entering into the complications of the Evans Gambit. One other move I want to mention here is a bit of a surprise weapon. It's the counter-sacrifice, playing the immediate d5, hitting his bishop. So now both bishops are under attack. And, of course, he could take your bishop, and you could take his bishop. And this is about an even position, so that's okay. If white's playing for an edge, probably the best move is to take here, and then you grab there with your knight. And your pieces, as black, your pieces are a bit awkwardly placed, but it's an interesting position and still playable. Different ways for white to continue. I guess c3 is probably the main move here, but there's also bishop b2 trying to attack your e-pawn, which is a little bit weak here now that the knight has been chased away. So, but notice that black can also grab the d-pawn. So after, for example, knight takes, the material stays even, and it's an open position, leads to some interesting play. So that's another way to play it if you want to avoid the main lines or surprise your opponent. But now let's look at the main way that the Evans Gambit is played. The most common move here, and probably the best move too, is just to take with the bishop. You can take with the knight, but that'll just transpose into some lines later. I'll show you that. And the main line, let's just go through this. C3 is bishop A5. This is the way it was played a lot in the 19th century. I think people in the 20th century, they tried to find some more solid ways to play, so the move bishop back to E7 came into vogue. And the chess engine actually likes the move bishop to D6. So those are a couple of alternatives, but this is kind of the way it was always played. So call this the traditional main line. D4, E takes D4, and then castling, not worrying about the fact that this C pawn is hanging. And what black usually does not take that pawn, but plays something like this, D6, pawn takes, and bishop to B6. And now you've reached a position, this is called the normal position of the Evans Gambit. And this is about as deep as I'm going to go. I just want to illustrate or show some of the ideas with arrows. First of all, the bishop can come, queen can come out to here and put pressure on, that was a wrong arrow. It can put pressure on this diagonal, and the knight can jump into G5. And the other bishop can come out to A3 and put pressure on this diagonal. And the queen from B3 can also swing over on the third rank to the king side in some lines. So pretty active position for white. Although you have to always keep in mind he's down a pawn, so he's got to play actively in order to maintain an advantage. For black, what he would like to do is develop this knight to E7 or F6, depending on circumstances, and castle. He also has the idea of playing the move knight A5, which harasses the bishop, and if the queen is here on B3, it attacks the queen and the bishop simultaneously and allows one of those pieces to be traded off, allows the bishop to be traded off, which is sometimes helpful in defusing the attack. So that was the main reason actually for playing the bishop from A5 back to B6, was to open up this A5 square for the knight. Okay, so this is the normal position, and those are the ideas. Let's back up a little bit. I mentioned that in this position you can actually take with the knight. So bishop to B4, pawn to B4, the Evans Gambit, knight takes, and one of the common moves here is C3, and the knight has no good square to go to, so you're going to waste time, and that's why this move is not so popular. But if white continues with castles, and black plays D6, then D4 is the main move here, and after an exchange, the bishop retreats. And once again, we've reached the normal position of the Evans Gambit. That's why typically you're taking with the bishop. After taking with the bishop, let's look at another couple of possibilities here. And C3 is the main move there. Like I mentioned, you can retreat along this way. You can also retreat to C5, but once again, that'll also transpose into if you play the normal moves, that'll transpose into the standard position of the Evans Gambit. But let's look at bishop A5, D4 again, and pawn takes, castles. You have to ask yourself, what about taking another pawn here? I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound, right? And you can take that. That is a move here. It's a little bit tricky. Let's see. Well, first of all, if you take with the bishop, it's not considered the best way to take. The knight can take back immediately, so white gets to eliminate that dangerous bishop. So now white has the bishop pair. Then queen b3, attacking here, and the best reply is queen f6, defending and also putting the queen on an active post. A lot of times you're tempted to play queen e7, but that's just not quite as good. Now, even though the queen does get kicked with e5, queen can go over here to g6 or up to f5. let's say queen f5, and then now queen takes c3. So this is a position that can be played, and actually the chess engine likes white slightly better. So even though white, if you count, white is down 2 pawns now, but he has a lot of activity, and he has open lines for his pieces, and black is still a couple moves away from castling. His bishop hasn't been developed. The knight can't go to its normal square on f6. So you've gotten a lot in exchange for those 2 pawns. And this is an interesting position to play if you want to play a position where you have a lot of piece activity in compensation for some material deficit. And it is actually good for white, although you always have to keep in mind you've got to play actively to compensate for your lack of material. Okay, so let's go back. That was if bishop takes. So normally, instead of bishop takes, it's pawn takes, if you're going to take the extra pawn. Again, queen b3, hitting f7, and queen f6, defending. And then you can play knight g5 here. You can play knight takes c3 here. Let's see, e5 though. e5 is the chess engine recommendation, queen g6, and knight takes c3. Similar to what we saw in the last position. If bishop takes and queen takes would be almost identical, except for the black queen went to f5 instead of g6, but that was a possibility as well. But this extra option is actually slightly better for black. It's a little bit better for black to try and keep this bishop and then just develop this knight. And so this is a way that black can play. So black is playing for material. He's 2 pawns up. He just needs to survive the onslaught. The chess engine rates this position as dead even, which means that white has complete compensation for 2 pawns. So just the activity of the pieces is enough to compensate for those 2 pawns. And also look at white's king. He's got better king safety, and black is still 1 move away from castling, though it looks like he will probably be able to castle on the next move. So it's an interesting position, and maybe a good one to practice on if you want to play positions where you get compensation and piece activity for in exchange for some material. Okay, that's pretty much it for the Evans Gambit. And lots more. I mean, there's a lot of different lines that have been played over the years, so there's lots more that can be said about it, but I just want to give that introduction to it. And then I wanted to wrap up this video by actually going over the game. We still have a record of the game that Captain Evans played against Alexander MacDonald in 1826. Fresh off his sailing boat with his inspiration, he went straight to the club and played a game against Alexander. So let's see how it went. Captain Evans was white, MacDonald was black, and get the normal moves. And now you'll notice one difference here, which is in this position, white castled. Now, it was discovered later, people started experimenting with his opening. It was discovered later that b4 is just a slightly more accurate move. After castling, black could play knight f6, and that would make the gambit less attractive. So, but d6 was played, and then it was a very common move, obviously, and still a common move in this position today. And then b4, he played his gambit. So MacDonald took it. He played c3. Bishop went to a5. He played queen to b3. This is here. Oh no, he went d4 first. So you see, the ideas are all the same. He was a pretty sharp guy. He came up with all of these ideas back in 1826. So d4, bishop to g4 was played. This is maybe not the most accurate defense. Over time, as this opening got played, more and more ways and more accurate ways of defending were discovered. So after bishop g4, queen b3, again putting pressure on this diagonal. Queen d7, defending f7 from the side. Not as active a move as queen f6. Knight g5 now, putting extra pressure on on f7. And notice the knight is defended by the bishop, so even if the queen had been on e7, for example, knight here would still have been playable. Okay, knight g5. Now this pawn is attacked, it needs to be defended. Knight d8 was played, and now the combination of knight d8 and bishop g5 has caused this position to shift, and now the engine evaluation is strongly in white's favor. But let's just play it out to see how it worked out in this particular game. D takes e5, d takes e5, bishop a3. Okay, getting the other diagonal working. And notice he got the bishop on that diagonal before the king even had a chance to castle. So now the king is sort of stuck in the center. Knight to h6 was played. f3, kicking the bishop. Black throws in this check. King goes to h1. And now bishop retreats to h5. And now rook d1 was played, hitting the queen. Queen doesn't have many good squares. And wherever it goes, I guess it's going to lose contact with this pawn. He can't go to d7 because notice the dark squared bishop is covering all of these squares, and the light squared bishop is covering all of these squares. So there's nowhere along this diagonal the queen can go to defend f7. So the queen retreats. And now, after queen c8, Captain Evans decides to sack the exchange here. Rook takes, queen takes. And now knight takes f7, gets his pawn there. Queen runs away to h4 with a threat. Notice that queen here is checkmate. There's no defense along the back rank. White has neglected the development of his queenside pieces, so his back rank is wide open. You wonder for a second if black has turned the tables on him, but he has this all under control here. And in fact, there's a mate in 3. He starts with the move queen to b5 check. c6 is played. Queen comes over here to e5 check. Now the king has very few moves. The bishop is covering these squares, the knight is covering that square, so the king goes to d7, then queen e6 check, defended by the bishop. King goes to c7, and the final move of the game, bishop d6 checkmate. Very pretty checkmate. The king surrounded by white's pieces, and all of his pieces are scattered. Look at all these pieces lined up on the rim over here. So even though this queen is threatening checkmate, black got checkmated first, so that's whoever checkmates first wins the game. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm going to continue next week, or in the next episode, looking at the Italian game, and I'll start looking at the two knights defense. So stay tuned. See you guys later, and leave any comments you have in the section below. Bye.